You're listening to Reach, Teach, Talk with Nat Dane.
Welcome back to another episode of Reach, Teach, Talk. I'm thrilled because I am back in the studio, the actual living, breathing studio for the first time in, 2+ years. When COVID hit, everything kind of went back home for all of us, and I was recording episodes from my own office and through Zoom, and now it is just amazing to be back with the headphones on, the microphone right here, and I am looking at our guest on a screen that you all can't see, but it certainly makes me feel like I am connecting with somebody across the table from me, not just through the screen 3,000 miles away. And welcome back, everybody, and I'm thrilled again to not just be back in the studio, but to explore a topic that kind of recently experienced a resurgence. In the past couple of days, there was an article in the Wall Street Journal about a boarding school in the tip of northwestern Massachusetts, the corner in Williamstown, Massachusetts, called Buxton School. And Buxton School began this year with a zero smartphone policy. And what they did is they decided, it seems like it was kind of triggered by a certain situation, but certainly been in the conversations at the administrative level for a while now, to take away the smartphone. And even the phrase taking away something makes it sound like, okay, they took something away. It almost sounds consequential, almost sounds pejorative or almost punishing. Yet we know that France, for example, took away the smartphones in their schools up through primary and middle school level back in 2018. We know that China, Israel, other countries around the world have made policies taking away smartphones from their daily school interactions. This is a boarding school, and Buxton is a boarding school, and Buxton is a school, therefore, where the taking away of the smartphone has a 24/7 impact, not just in the classroom, but in the the touch points, the sidebar experiences that students have, both in and outside of the classroom, the sports field, theater on the stage, also in meals, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and in the dorm life and all of the social life that happens in a boarding school. So all of this makes Buxton a very ripe kind of test, or let's say kind of lab school for the impact, to measure and gauge the impact of smartphone technology in the relational elements of school life. So yes, we can talk about its impact on the academics, but as we all know, this podcast, Reach, Teach, Talk, is about relational teaching and how relationships are central to the learning experience, the teaching and learning experience. And in this way, how have smartphones impacted the relationships between students and teachers, students and peers, and parents with this new policy? So without much further ado, I'll introduce our Associate Head of School, John Kalapos, who is freshly from the oven, having baked ginormous chocolate chip cookies. Anybody in his proximity is lucky to be around him and smelling those chocolate chip cookies. It is evening over in Williamstown, Massachusetts. The sun is just about to set here in Los Angeles. John, it is wonderful to have you, and I'm really excited to just have a deeper conversation about what Buxton has observed with this policy. But before we start, can you explain? I mean, I just kind of gave a 30,000-foot view of what your policy was. Maybe explain a little bit of the context behind it and what the policy actually is.
Yeah, so it's great to talk to you about this. I spent a lot of time thinking about this and talking about this on campus, and it's really exciting to sort of share it with like a larger education community. So thanks for having me. I'd say we approached it sort of as like a mindful technology policy, right? Like there's not it would be wrong to say that smartphones don't bring value into our everyday lives. Like we have there are tools that we use. I still have a smartphone, but it's something that we as a school decided there was less, they brought more harm than good in our on-campus community. And basically our policy is that like you may not have a smartphone. Like I have my dumb phone here. Let me pull it out of my pocket, or maybe it's actually sitting right over here. But you can sort of see like this is my work phone. Like it calls, it texts, like that's all it does. And that's because like at boarding school, like something we think is really important is sort of the idea that like we're connecting with each other in these like really genuine and vulnerable moments. And also like that connection with each other is paramount to anything else, right? Like we're a community of about 100 people, and we really want to get to know everybody. But we also want to be able to get in touch with each other when we're not physically in the same space. So you can call, you can text, and then more importantly, we want to think about like, well, what role does tablets have in this? What roles does smartwatch have in it? It's like it starts to ask all these other questions. And we actually kicked those questions to a to a student committee, and they were the ones sort of like with them develop policies for everything else. So like we as a faculty sort of planted the flag as like we don't believe this to be something we want in our community, and the students sort of got us along that journey.
That's fascinating. So you had the students involved in the decision. Let's take a step back. I'm curious about whether there was any kind of precipitating event or any sort of, that catalyzed this urgency in a sense to change your smartphone policy.
I mean, there was a couple, right? And so I think any teacher who taught through the pandemic will sort of like think back to pre-pandemic times of thinking of like a different student than the students we were teaching during the pandemic, right? Like it's just like everything sort of went online for months at a time. We were fully online from March to June, and then we opened in person from September of 2020, I believe. And we were running a hybrid school. And so even with that, we were all very connected to our screens and very connected to our devices. And in sort of the fall and early winter of 2020, we started to realize how much time our students were spending on their devices and sort of the social effect that was having on the school. Like we were seeing lower participation in the arts. We were seeing just like it was harder to get students to come to meals, and when they were at meals, they were sort of just like on their phones, like scrolling on TikTok, headphones in, as opposed to having like silly, fun teenage conversations. The moment that sort of catalyzed for a lot of other administrators was like there was like a physical altercation on campus. It wasn't like by any means a fist fight, but it was two kids yelling at each other. And another student was live streaming it, and that was being live streamed into all of our dormitories, right? And so we as a faculty, whereas like we'd usually just pull the kids aside and sort of talk to them, then had to also go into the dorms and see sort of how this message was spreading in a way that like the spread of technology and like the instant information of knowing everything all the time and anyone you've ever met being able to reach you at any time, we felt isn't actually valuable for the type of education we're trying to provide here. Like we think it's important that you can intentionally reach anyone you want to reach, but that communication can and should be intentional. It shouldn't be sort of like my phone buzzes, I look down, oh, my friend from home is like wants to talk to you about something totally irrelevant to like the awesome thing that's happening in front of me right now.
But it's your friend at home who's calling you or texting you, and therefore it's your friend, and therefore you're probably very caught between, right? Like you're in your classroom, but you also have your friend texting you, and where does my loyalty lie? I'm going to respond to my friend, and then I'll regain focus immediately, I'm sure, with what's going on in calculus. Like that's a good example of getting in the head of a 17-year-old student, right?
Yeah.
So So thinking about the word intentionality, which you've used, I'm struck by two things that you shared right there about the impact of smartphones. One is the intentionality to me is like a freezing of time. In order to be intentional about something, one basically just pauses and hopefully reflects before making a decision on how he or she is going to, what that next step would be. So to be intentional is to be mindful, to be focused on what that next step is going to be, and that taking a beat to reflect, taking a beat to pause. So one of the things of the two that stands out to me that you noticed and that your faculty noticed was there was less intentionality in terms of decisions being made. And I'm wondering about how did your faculty view that impact on learning? How does intention and taking a beat impact the learning experience? And how did you see that impacted with the use of smartphones, particularly during the pandemic years?
Yeah, I mean, I think most teachers would agree that like we have sort of seen like a participant's loss of attention and like a constant like you're not only competing with the phone, you're competing with all these other like virtual or physical communities that these students are a part of. You're competing with like these like tools and social media networks that are designed to take people's attention and have them pick it up 30 times a day, right? Like so in terms of like learning, and especially at a high school level, I believe it's really important that like you sit and wrestle with an idea for like 20, 30, 40 minutes, right? Like it's like, I'm teaching freshman English right now. We just closed out a book by George Saunders, which is, having and I have students in that classroom really wrestling with some like with ideas of authoritarianism that you could so easily find like an Instagram equivalent to, but it's not near like the conversation isn't as rich because the students have to make those jumps themselves. They have to put together sort of what they have seen and like connect it to the text. And you just get like, it's felt to me sort of like the discussions we've had last year versus the discussions we've had this year are just so much more robust and so much more interesting as a teacher, right? Like I don't like everyone's phone doesn't light up and all of a sudden I've lost my class and there's nothing I can do. Like if I've lost my class, like that's my bad. Like I asked a bad question. I need to own that as a teacher as opposed to like, a like, just something that I have very little control over, right? It's like my students are more present and my classroom management that I have to do is so much more like traditional and it's honestly way more fun. Like I enjoy going to work way more because of like, I'm like having to like deal with poop jokes from 14-year-olds as opposed to, a like cyberbullying that's happening right in front of me and is invisible to my eye.
Can you give another example of, first of all, really well articulated, really good articulation of the feeling of teaching when the students are engaged in what you're teaching and not distracted. So I love that. What does it feel like, or what are students generally doing when they have their smartphones in the classroom? Like, what is it simply just texting, or
Yeah, so something that I noticed was like the need for constant stimulation, right? And that is so you'd have students plugged into their headphones, right? Like running AirPods like under their hair, under their hats, like playing music in class. And then also like when they are not so engaged with the material, instead of like sitting there and being bored, which is a very useful skill, like just taking out their phones, and then you as a teacher are sort of confronted like, am I going to police these students, right? Like am I going to like burn sort of like some of my social capital that I have to like either take their phone away, stop class, and like ruin the conversation that everyone else is having? Or like am I just going to sort of like let this kid be disengaged for 4 minutes? And when you're making that choice again and again and again, it's honestly like it's exhausting. It's like not fun. Which like sort of leads to like a interesting anecdote, which is that like when we announced this, the students were like, well, what if you just enforce the rules that are there? And it's like, we tried that. It didn't work, like these are not devices that like both adults and teenagers like really have the ability to exercise the self-control necessary to engage in like interesting, thoughtful education.
Because as you said earlier, like smartphones are designed to hit the dopamine to distract. They're designed to, the endless scroll. Every deliberate decision made by, the developers is in order to, commercialize, commodify attention, right? There's a great book that Johan Hari just released this summer about attention. I'll throw that up there in the description of this episode for any viewer and listener who wants to see it. But it's an incredible deep dive into the ways that our attention is being diverted through smartphones, social media, et cetera, technology. And what you're talking about in the classroom there, the reason why I asked the question about what is it, like what do students find, on their smartphone when they're in the classroom, the reason why I asked that question is so that people listeners can get a real understanding that it's not just that they're texting. It's not just that they're like, communicating with friends or parents. As you said, like there's the earbuds and there's listening, there's watching Netflix, there's listening to podcasts, there's, just scrolling TikTok, right? Like there's so many different channels. I've always used to say that it's like putting a TV back in the day, putting a television on every student's desk with like a billion channels and saying focus on, pre-algebra. So, right. So, but what I want to actually ask you next is about, what you just shared about how you as a teacher, your relationship with your students, what I'm hearing you say is that your relationship with your students has changed this fall due to this policy, because what I'm hearing you say is you no longer have to play cat and mouse with the students the way that you did before. You're not, when the student said to you, well, why don't you just reinforce the rules more, you don't have to do that. You don't have to deal with that as a teacher. And if we're talking about the teacher's prime job, which is to educate and to teach and to engage students and to really motivate students through using the content as the shared tool to do that, the idea of not having to worry about being the police in the classroom I can only imagine it opens up your mind as a teacher to different ways toward content delivery, different ways to approach the curveball question that students inevitably ask, different emotional responses to grappling in the classroom, right? Like it frees you as a teacher. And I wonder if it's almost been like the boiling lobster, like the lobster in the lobster pot, where like over the years, as technology has made its way in the classroom day by day, teachers kind of drip, the temperature goes up a degree every month. But it's only when you actually remove the device from the classroom that you realize how much as a teacher your time has been spent and allocated toward this cat and mouse relationship with students. Does that resonate with you?
Yeah, totally. And I think it's important to also like turn it back to on the teachers as well. Like we are also constantly connected, right? I last year would keep my smartphone on the desk and I would see messages come in and I'd see, like my Instagram notifications and all these and now it's like when I leave my house, I forward the calls from my like personal number to my work number. And then like I see my notifications twice, like I'll open my laptop, I'll see notifications twice a day, but I'm like really able to engage with my students like in the classroom, in those moments in between classes, right? Like we're not all just like, oh, I have a free moment, like look down, right? And it does. I think like the analogy of like lobster in the pot feels really apt, but also like when I leave campus and I look around and like we're in a town with a college campus. There's like tons of young people walking around, and I just like see them like walking around, like looking down, like, and I'm like, this feels like a Black Mirror episode. You know what I mean? Like, why would you willfully do this? Like it's like we all like on campus, we're all like looking up, like engaging with each other, and then you leave and you sort of like see how reliant everyone else is, and it's like, whoa, I'm really happy this isn't a part of my workplace. You know what I mean?
Have you heard that at all from any student? I'm just curious, like honestly, has a student come to you and said, you know what, I actually appreciate this policy because of what you just said. I walk off campus.
There are students. Yeah, there are students that really appreciate it. There are students that are, and like a lot of students are pretty ambivalent about it, right? Like it's interesting to see sort of like classic teenage rebellion and apathy come out, where they will say, yeah, no, I don't mind not having my smartphone, and this year is better, but it's not because like we don't like our smartphones are gone. It's just like a different year, and it's like, well, there's one big thing that's different. So like, but it's almost like the conversations that I have about it, they feel very like either thrilled about it or this is fine and like I'm willing to do it. Is kind of a lot of the conversations I have with students.
Excellent. And you're saving a lot of future chiropractor bills by this policy with those necks, tech neck. Hey, John, I'm curious now also about parents, and because we're in this anxious age where the knee-jerk reaction I understand from parents would be, but wait, something horrible could happen at Buxton. How will I know? How will I be able to communicate with my child? So have you had any of that, and what's the answer to that? And what has in general been kind of the unexpected or predicted obstacles toward implementing this policy with parents?
Yeah, so I mean, we made this decision in consultation with our board and as a faculty. We didn't make this decision in consultation with parents, and that was, I think, a misstep, right? Like I think like we should have involved parents in this decision a little bit more. Our fear was that among bringing parents in, we wouldn't be able to make a unilateral like removal of smartphones on campus. Like there would have been lobbying for having times and spaces and places for exactly these reasons, right? Which is that parents want access to their kids. I've been having these conversations for almost a year now with parents and other, students and whatever, and I've just like yet to hear a compelling argument about like why you can't use a not smartphone to get in touch with your kid. You know what I mean? Like it's like, yes, it is more cumbersome. Like that's the point, right? Like it's like your kid may not be carrying this device because it doesn't fill them with dopamine. Like there is no, like the screen is black and white, it's e-ink, like it's not fun to use. It is a tool as any other tool is meant to exist. And so we have parents that are frustrated that their kids aren't carrying their phones with them all the time and they don't have 24-hour access to them because this phone like is designed to be used as little as possible, like that is, and so we have students leaving their phones in their rooms. We have students losing their phones and for days and they don't care, right? And so it's switching from, a kid having a bad moment at boarding school, which happened, and immediately calling their parent, the parent immediately calling the school, and it being this whole like hullabaloo, as opposed to like a kid having a bad day, like finding someone on campus to talk about it, sort of resolving it, talking it through, like putting it into the context, and then, telling a parent later. And I get probably about like at least 3 or 4 calls, texts, or emails a week, which is like, hey, tell my kid to call me. Because I haven't heard from them in a week. And as someone who works at a boarding school, like I think that's great. You know what I mean? Like it's like we're running a program here.
Absolutely.
And like that's like what we want. We want our kids to be present here, like in this community. And we're not trying to cut their access off from anyone. It's like they're making the choice to be fully present here. And like that's a choice that like they're gonna have to learn how to do and set the boundaries that they have with their communication and their technology.
John, this is awesome. First of all, for anybody who's just listening to this podcast and not watching the video version, when John held up the phone that every student, every faculty member and staff member has, they're called light phones. It looks like if Amazon Kindle developed a smartphone, this is what exactly it would look like. And it's that grayscale, definitely not addictive, no bright colors whatsoever, and it's just the bare minimum. Designed, it's the anti-smartphone. It's designed not to, as you said, John, to produce dopamine experiences in the students. The other pushback I would imagine Buxton School admin and faculty may have received, John, is, but what about this idea of preparing students for the real world? The real world requires integrated technology in every aspect of their lives. Has there been any response to that you found compelling and that you've used yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I'll go back to my initial response, which is that like there's like very few problems that one cannot overcome with a non-smartphone and a computer, right? And I think that like, I point because we have, every teacher sort of has different ways of communicating this. And an argument that the students hate is like, well, when I was a kid, we didn't have smartphones, right? Like the students absolutely hate that argument. And fair, fair.
Totally. Too bad for you.
The argument like that I have sort of been employing this whole time is like, find me something that like a smartphone does that a dumb phone and a computer can't do. And there are things, right? There like have been compelling arguments, like the glucose monitors, things like that. Like yeah, it's like for sure you should have a smartphone in your backpack for that. I agree. But I think like the notion of preparing people for the real world, there's a study that shows that, if you send 3 people on the same path, right, and you give them an iPhone with Google Maps and you say, get to this location, and then you take away their phone, you say, now do it again. Some large portion, like 80% of people can't do it. But if you give them paper instructions, it's like 50 to 40% of people can do it. And if you give them verbal instructions, like almost all of them can get to that location, right? And I think, we don't live in a day and age where like we're taking away their phones when they're not at school. You know, like we run a program 8 months out of the year. The other 4 months they're using a smartphone. They're going to be like engaged with the technical and like youth-based conversations of technology. And for us, it's like almost feel, and I say this and students roll their eyes at me, but it's like giving you the gift of like learning how to do things without your phone, because everyone is going to know how to like achieve these like means with their phones, but like you are going to have a different set of tools in your toolbox that is going to set you aside from all of your peers, whether whatever you want to do next, whether that be in college, whether that be in anything, you know, like in the trades, anything like that. And I think another really important thing is that our students are learning how to strike up like organic, weird conversations in in like the like downtime moments that I think we as adults have started to forget how to have, and like every teenager is forgetting how to have, right? So like when I'm in public, like I'll just talk to strangers and people are like, that's a little weird. But like it's because like that's what I reach to as normal, because like so much of my day is that when I'm sitting around doing nothing, either I'm like thinking, I'm processing, or I'm striking up conversations with my students, because like we all are living in that same place, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that absolutely makes sense. And actually, Johan Hari, in his book is called Stolen Focus, by the way. Highly recommend it. But he talks about a very similar experience when he gave up his smartphone, and he gave it up for 3 months or 6 months, and just lived out in Provincetown, Cape Cod. And he found himself just like really, really desperately, clinging to human connection, human conversation with strangers, with anybody, who would listen to him, but finding that like, it was hard to break into other people because they were glued to their phones, their devices, or when he would have a conversation, it would be this awkward, kind of stilted conversation, like what you're talking about. So definitely that too. I'm wondering, so you're the associate head of school, John, at Buxton School, boarding school out in Williamstown, Massachusetts, northwest corner of Massachusetts. And your school has been identified in this article in the Wall Street Journal that came out just 2 days ago, I think it was on November 6th. And it is a blueprint in a sense, or let's just say it's a photograph of a school that changed their policy in a significant way, in a way that other schools might be desperately hoping or wishing they could, yet there is a lot of headwinds that they would face to do it. So you guys have done it, and here we are 3 months now, in month 3 of this year. What can you say to anybody listening who is a school administrator, school leader, who's really keen to implement a policy like Buxton's? What are some things that you would put as really important for them to consider, and what helped you guys as you rolled it out?
Yeah, I mean, I think like we are in a pretty unique position to roll this policy out, right? Like we are a boarding school, we are pretty small. We're pretty like most of our major decisions go through the faculty, and that's how, like we make a lot of our decisions through consensus. And we have a background in progressive education. And so sort of making bold decisions about pedagogy is something that like we feel empowered to do based on our mission. So like all of those things sort of set us up um to take a step back in like what we want in order to like achieve our goals of progressive education. So like I want to like say like I don't actually know that this would be the best policy for every school, but it was definitely the best policy for my school. Um and I think that like the advice that I would have to other administrators is that like if this is something that's interesting to you and like is something you want to pursue, I think you should do it. Like it feels like we have sort of like found the secret sauce that like has made like it's like bringing the community together in a way where like you see all of these like sort of small upsides to it. Barring if you can't do it, starting to think about how technology enhances your classroom and how technology like takes away from your classroom, right? Like I think we have this idea that tech is like this great thing. I remember like when I was a student, it's sort of like oh we're like we're moving to use these tools, and like they're sort of clunky, and like ed tech I think is like there's a lot of snake oil in ed tech, like you sort of have these like ideas that like what makes teaching fun and gratifying is connecting with students and seeing like, there's nothing any teacher says that's like the mind-blowing moment. Like I don't care how many, like feel good movies you watch. It's like every teacher knows it's like you say something 1,000 times and then the thousandth and first times it clicks. And like that's what feels good, right? And like that's about the connection you have with your student. And so if you can like break down those barriers in your classroom of like getting yourself in front of your students and like getting your students to connect with you, like start there. I think with our policy, like we saw the biggest impediment was like the thing in between us, right? And so like we removed it. But I think in a public school setting, in a private day school, like you're gonna be playing cat and mouse games with phones. So communicating sort of your values, and like that's what we ended up doing from the time we made the announcement till today. And like when we like in our admissions process, it's like we're not saying like these are bad devices, that we're communicating our values in such a way that's like these do not help us live up to our values, and so we don't want them to be a part of our community. Like if you want to be a part of that experiment, we like wholeheartedly welcome you into that. And if you don't want to be, like if your phone means more to you than being part of like an in-person robust community that's like focused on like project-based arts, like all these things that like I could like, wax poetic about our mission statement forever. It's boring. Like that, like then like if your phone means more to you than like like that's okay. But like that's like not what I believe. So like there's, 1,000 other schools in the world, and like I empower you to go to one of them.
Yeah, of course, of course. Independent schools being each of them independent communities that hopefully parents understand when they're applying that there are all different types of independent schools, and Buxton being one of them. But I got to say, John, that this conversation just brings to mind so much of what resonates with relational teaching and what we talk about here in Reach Teach Talk, which is really about the connection between teacher and student and students and schools and parents and schools in the outside world, the classroom in the outside world. And, certainly the pandemic has made those borders, those boundaries far more porous. Yet I was drawn to this conversation because what Buxton School has done has been able to maintain a healthy, porous boundary between school and the outside world without putting up a wall, and also without just letting it be free range. And coming out of the pandemic, where so many mental health issues are based on, isolation, the impact of long-term isolation on teenagers, on adolescents, boys and girls, the loneliness that comes with that, the social media influence, whether it's Instagram, TikTok, social media, or whether it's just overdoing it on video games, just that blurriness of what are really truly interactive experiences and relational experiences, and what's just occupying our time type of experiences, avoiding being bored. You mentioned boredom earlier as an asset, something, a time in our lives to actually appreciate being bored. And by the way, another great book is called The End of Absence, and which is absolutely just basically a book about boredom. But it's not a boring book. It is amazing, and it's a great book to have on your bookshelf, because so much of what you're sharing, John, is acceptance of those moments in life where we are forced to reflect. We're forced to just take that beat and then to act with intention. And clearly, that's going on at Buxton in a way that's impacted by this new policy. Before we wrap up this conversation, is there anything that hasn't been brought up, or anything that you wanted to share, or any question or any comment that you might have as a kind of concluding comment?
Yeah, I mean, I think like something that I think has been really valuable that is sort of gets missed in the larger discussion about all of this is like how like and going back to boredom, right? Like I think back to like my teenage years, and I think back to sort of like some of the like best and worst ideas I had came from when I was bored, right? And I think that like some of your like those are both really incredible teaching moments. And I I really, really like I think that is like one of the most valuable things is like I would so much rather talk a kid through a bad decision they've made than sort of like watch them like willow away in like mediocre entertainment. You know what I mean? Like that's like easy, right? And so like that's something that like and or like a great, it's like I like stumbled upon like 4 kids building a fort in the woods the other day, and I was like, this is awesome, keep doing this, like, and they're like, yeah, we were bored, and I was like, sick, so I would just like, as much as it sounds weird, like leaning into that boredom is really important, and I think like has a really important space in like all of our lives. I don't want to just say education. Like yeah. Anyway, that's what I would.
Let's leave. We will conclude this conversation on that topic, on that theme of boredom and the value of boredom, and how. I mean, I just think the connection is fantastic, John, because the first thing that one might think about when starting a new school year with a policy that is taking away what is such a key part of our lives, immediately could lead to, oh, I'm going to be bored. I'm going to be bored at school this year. This is going to be just so boring. And yet what you're saying, those 4 guys in the woods building a fort, like, are you kidding? That's so great. That reminds me of my childhood. Certainly it reminds me of, when I was in high school a million years ago, we didn't even have the option or the temptation for technology. We didn't even have like the internet. But you have that. You're not depleting these students of the opportunity. You got Wi-Fi, you've got your laptops, and they don't have smartphones in the classroom, and they don't have smartphones in the dorms. They don't have smartphones in the times of proximal interaction, which you speak so well about the importance of those moments and honoring and appreciating those moments as best as we can. So truly, 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 John Kalapos, Associate Head at Buxton School. It has been an absolute pleasure. And thank you, by the way, thank you for this conversation. Talk about multitasking, because you focus in this conversation the exact same time you're baking these incredible chocolate chip cookies. And maybe someday technology will evolve to such a way that like you can pass me one of those cookies through the screen from 3,000 miles away, because I'm sure they smell amazing and I'm sure they're going to taste even better. So thank you.
I mean, that's like the whole Willy Wonka ideal, right?
It's absolutely the Willy Wonka ideal. Fantastic.
But yeah, it was great to chat with you. Happy to talk about this, and yeah, love what you're doing, and happy, like, thanks for spreading the ideas.
Absolutely. And by the way, anybody listening, just look it up, just Google the Wall Street Journal article. It was either November 6th or 5th when it came out. And if you check out their website, it's not just an article, text heavy. It's actually got some really nice pictures as well of Buxton School. And I'm curious. I mean, John, I'd love to come out and visit you guys just to take a look at the school in person next time I'm in the Boston area, Massachusetts. So.
Yeah, you're more than welcome anytime. We're about as far as you can get from Boston while still being in the States, so
it's okay.
I'll take your drive up too. You're more than welcome.
Route 2, Mohawk Trail, all that. Hit Greenfield and keep going another hour. Hey, fantastic talk with you. And again, thank you so much for giving up part of your evening. And I look forward to spreading the word through Reach Teach Talk to our audience here. And again, thrilled to be back in the studio. I'm thrilled. Armin, our producer here, giving a wave, seeing the LED logo in the back just makes me feel like, okay, it's a homecoming of sorts. So again, John, thanks for being the first back to the studio interview.
You've been listening to Reach Teach Talk with Nat Damon. If you'd like to recommend a guest for a future episode, you can send your suggestion or questions to nat@reachacademics.com.